666 AD, a fierce battle raged, with soldiers clashing swords and blood splattering across the field. The great magister, Yahello, who was the guardian god of Gali, died. His body lay still, marking the end of an era. Everything went silent for a moment. The world held its breath. Yahello's death brought a great schism to Gali. Gali no longer had the means to stop the 100,000-strong army of the Tang dynasty. 2 years passed. It was now the year 668 AD. A blade flashed in the sun. A man kneeled on the wooden platform, awaiting death. Below, other soldiers looked on, and as he cried out, "Father, please spare me!" a general sat high on his horse, sneering at the Gali soldiers. He laughed. "Look at those Gali bastards trembling. Ooh, ha ha ha." The fighting continued without end. The man on the platform continued to beg, his voice cracking with fear. "Spare me. Please spare me. I beg you." A soldier responded coldly. "Blame your misfortune of being born in the wrong country." The man could only groan in despair. The executioner raised his sword, bringing it down with a sickening thud. Blood splattered across the platform. They gasped, recognizing the red three-legged crow flags in the distance. Gasp! Those people are the red three-legged crow flag? The cavalry charged forward, their armor gleaming in the sun. The soldiers shouted in excitement. "It's the black armored demon cavalry. Gali's cavalry has arrived." The soldier yelled at the top of his lungs, trying to keep everyone calm. "Do not panic." He looked absolutely furious. The general sat high on his horse, surrounded by his troops. He spoke with arrogance, believing their victory was assured. He gestured with his sword, declaring that the Gali scum were no match for them. A commander rode a war boar and charged straight toward the enemy. He shouted his challenge over the din of battle. "I'll show you, black armored demon cavalry commander. Face my spear." The black armored demon cavalry charged forward with unstoppable momentum, their hooves pounding the earth. They were a storm of steel and fury, ready to crash into the enemy lines. In a flash, the general's blade cut through the air, meeting its mark with deadly precision. The enemy commander on the war boar didn't even have time to react before he was struck down. The troops watched in stunned silence as the general's attack landed. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The general, in a single stroke, the general stood tall over the fallen commander, his sword dripping with blood. The air was thick with the smell of death, a testament to his overwhelming power. Panic surged through the ranks as the troops realized the battle was turning against them. "Saint, stop him!" they screamed, desperate to stop the general's advance. The battle was a storm of steel and blood, a brutal dance of death. Soldiers screamed as they fell, their cries lost in the roar of combat. More and more soldiers fell, each death a brutal punctuation mark in the ongoing carnage. The air was thick with the smell of blood and the sounds of dying men. Ground was littered with corpses, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. The realization hit like a hammer. The black armored demon cavalry. Another soldier lay lifeless among the carnage. A voice cut through the chaos, filled with dread. "Cursed war demons." A soldier braced himself as a spear hurtled toward him, the point glinting with deadly intent. The fight for survival was far from over. The general's gaze was firm, his eyes narrowed with determination. He knew what had to be done. A soldier shouted a warning, his voice filled with panic. Tang forces were swarming from the rear, threatening to overwhelm their position. Great Saja gave his orders clearly and quickly. He told Hui to lead the friendly forces to Pyongyang Fortress and protect the civilians. He assured him that Buru and Uru would hold off the enemy. The warrior gripped his weapon tightly. He declared that he would clear the path, his voice ringing with resolve. The spear surged forward, a deadly point leading the charge. The battle was about to begin again. The battlefield was a mess of clashing steel and desperate cries, a whirlwind of death. The Tang soldiers swarmed, their numbers pressing relentlessly against the defenders. The order came down to fall back. The soldiers shouted to stick close and run, warning each other not to look back at the approaching enemy. One soldier stepped forward, pleading with the general to let him fight. He declared that he wanted to protect his family and Gali with his own hands, his voice cracking with emotion as he addressed the general as his father. The soldier repeated his plea, his eyes fixed on the general. He was determined to fight, no matter the cost. The general paused, his expression unreadable. He asked the soldier if he could ride a horse, explaining that if he couldn't ride, he couldn't fight. The soldier stammered, unable to answer. The general commanded his men to give the young soldier a horse. He then told his son that was enough, and he needed to go protect his mother and sibling. The general's voice was stern, but his eyes betrayed his worry. The general shouted out his next orders, his voice booming across the field. He commanded everyone to gather the elderly, children, and wounded, and head for Pyongyang Fortress. There was no time to waste. The general's son turned to look back at the battlefield, his expression filled with worry. He knew he had to obey his father's orders, but leaving him behind felt like a betrayal. The boy looked towards his father, pleading with him to come back alive. Far behind him, the army marched forward, a sea of soldiers ready to face the enemy. The enemy commander roared, his face contorted with rage. He commanded his troops to not let a single one escape, his voice echoing across the battlefield. The soldiers marched forward, their voices rising in a unified roar. The ground vibrated with each step they took, a deafening thud echoing across the field. A group of civilians sprinted towards the fortress gates, their faces etched with fear. They desperately hoped to find safety behind the thick stone walls and the large, imposing red door. The scene outside the gate was one of utter despair. Injured and exhausted, the civilians begged for the soldiers to open the gates, their voices filled with desperation. The soldier stood guard, his face unreadable, as he listened to the pleas from outside. He looked like he was struggling with his duty, torn between orders and compassion. Tears streamed down the civilian's face as they pounded on the gate, begging for help. Their cries echoed in the courtyard, a desperate plea for salvation. The captain of the guard looked grim as he spoke. He asked if there was truly no other way to avoid this disaster. The soldier knelt, his voice filled with despair. He said to kill him, knowing the enemy's numbers were too great to overcome. Someone started laughing, a crazed sound that filled the air. The laughter suggested they had clearly lost it. The captain of the guard, under Emperor Demudiok Yahello, urged his leader to escape. He warned that the encirclement was tightening, and there was no time left. The emperor lamented that he had failed to protect the nation, founded by King Dongmyung. He wondered where he could even go. The captain responded that a ship had been prepared, urging him to sail south, gather his forces, and rebuild. Emperor Demudiok Yahello lay there, staring up at the ceiling. He looked like he had given up, completely drained of hope. The emperor wondered who was left to fight if they gathered their forces. Was there anyone still willing to stand against the enemy? The captain of the guard interrupted, asking if the great Saja, Go Jinshun, was still present. He seemed to be suggesting that Go Jinshun might be the answer. The emperor considered this. The great Saja, so he remained. The thought gave him a flicker of hope. The captain of the guard knelt before the emperor. He asked if his majesty would grant him one request. The emperor lay there, lost in thought. He was probably wondering what would happen next, and if there was any hope left. Delete entire narration. The ground was littered with bodies. The cost of war was being paid in blood. The armored warrior stood tall, his sword dripping with blood. Your death will be remembered by your son, he said, his voice cold and final. The battlefield was a scene of carnage. Dead soldiers and horses were scattered across the ground, a testament to the ferocity of the fighting. The warrior surveyed the battlefield, a sea of Tang Dynasty soldiers stretching before them. He said something. He then asked if they were scared. He grinned, proposing a contest to see who could kill more. He added, 2 warriors stood side by side, observing the unfolding battle. One of them said. The other responded with a simple, "Is that so?" The warrior turned, his back to the battlefield. It looked like moving forward would be tough from now on. One of the warriors turned to the other, a fierce glint in his eyes. He said something. The warrior grinned, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. He said something. The army advanced, a sea of mounted warriors moving as one. They were ready for anything, their spears raised high, reflecting the sun. From above, the battlefield spread out like a chessboard, with soldiers lined up on both sides. It was a terrifying sight, the calm before the storm. The fighting was about to begin. It was time to see who would survive. The warrior smiled, a glint in his eye. He was looking forward to the fight, ready to spill some blood. The final battlefield should be quite thrilling. The warrior's face was grim, his eyes narrowed with determination. He vowed that not a single enemy soldier would set foot inside Pyongyang Fortress. 2 men stood in the doorway, talking quietly. The air was thick with anticipation as they wondered what was about to happen. A lone rider approached the fortress gates, the sound of his horse's hooves echoing. People stopped what they were doing to watch him arrive, wondering what news he carried. The great Saja Go Jinshun obeyed the Yolji's command, and ordered everyone to retreat. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, questioning the order. One asked if retreating would put Pyongyang fortress in danger, but the other suggested that the Yolji must have a plan. The officer barked out orders, telling everyone to move to the ships prepared at the port. They were to await further instructions, but the urgency in his voice was clear. The soldiers figured that the Yolje intended to sail south and regroup his forces. One of them scoffed, calling him a noble. The soldier spat, saying that the Yolja had ruined the country and fled, looking pathetic. He muttered that he should have put a hole in his skull himself. He then shouted for the general. A messenger arrived, reporting that a Tang cavalry force of 500 was pursuing a carriage that had left Pyongyang fortress. He assumed it was another noble fleeing. The messenger's eyes widened as he realized something. The carriage had the Yolje's flag flying on it. The officer yelled, ordering the guards to form a shield. He told them to stretch out to cover the carriage, not letting a single arrow through. The Tang cavalry raced across the open land, kicking up dust. They were gaining on the carriage, determined to catch it. The soldier called out to the general, saying he would buy time and asking him to go on ahead. Go. Jinxian refused, saying that was nonsense. Someone shouted for the vice captain of the guard, calling out to him. The soldier looked at the others and yelled that they had to protect His Highness, the Crown Prince. The soldiers around him raised their spears, ready to defend the carriage at all costs. The rider coughed, blood splattering from his lips. He tasted iron and pain, knowing he'd taken a bad hit. Another rider went down, the force of the blow sending him reeling. He barely managed a grunt before falling. The vice captain of the guard barked orders, yelling for the cavalry to pick up the pace. He said they could catch them soon if they just pushed harder. The soldiers rode hard, their armor gleaming in the sun. They were focused on one thing, catching the carriage. The clash was sudden and brutal, spears splintering against shields. The soldiers fought with a desperate ferocity, knowing what was at stake. The rider felt a sharp pain shoot through him. He coughed, trying to clear his head. The battlefield stretched out before them, a chaotic mix of dust and blood. The riders charged forward, their destination clear. The captain of the guard, Great Saja, watched the battle unfold. He knew they were running out of time. The Great Saja gave the order, his voice cold and hard. He commanded all forces to annihilate them, letting not a single one escape. The soldiers grunted with effort, the sounds of battle echoing around them. The clash of steel on steel filled the air as they fought for their lives. The battlefield was a whirlwind of clashing steel and desperate cries. Soldiers fought and died in a tangled mess of limbs and weapons, each swing a desperate attempt to survive. The soldier roared as he cut down the two demons. He was determined to wipe out those monsters. With a confident grin, the archer prepared to fire. He boasted that he could take down two bastards with one shot. The soldier's hand clenched into a fist, knuckles white with rage. He was ready to crush anyone who stood in his way. Yuel Juburu roared, his face contorted with fury. He declared he was going to crush them all. The ground shook as the cavalry charged forward, a wave of mounted soldiers ready to crash into the enemy lines. Each rider gripped their spear, focused on the battle ahead. The captain of the guard demanded to know if the Yahello was inside the carriage. He was told it wasn't him. Then who was it? The answer came back. It was His Highness, the Crown Prince. The guards stood tall and silent, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. They were an impenetrable wall, protecting the carriage and its precious cargo from any threat. A faint rainbow arced behind them, an odd sight amidst the chaos. The carriage stood ready, the guards tense and watchful. The red flag fluttered in the wind, a symbol of the Crown Prince's presence. They had to get out of here, and fast. They continued their journey through the forest, the carriage rumbling along the dirt path. The soldiers stayed alert, their eyes scanning the trees for any sign of danger. The guards stood firm, their faces grim. They were ready to give their lives to protect the carriage and its precious cargo. One of the guards asked if it was truly a decree from His Majesty. He was told yes, His Majesty Yaolji had ordered them to escort the young emperor by ship to a safe location. The image was a logo, nothing important to see here. The carriage and its escort continued on, the sun beginning to set. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple as they pressed forward. The path snaked its way through the mountains, a thin white line against the green landscape. In the distance, the ships waited, their dark shapes promising escape. One of the guards figured that at their current speed, they should reach their destination around sunrise. The soldiers nodded, their faces grim with determination. Suddenly, a soldier shouted to the general that the enemy was here. The news spread quickly through the ranks, and the soldiers tensed, ready for a fight. One of the soldiers cursed, wondering how those bastards had tracked them down. He yelled that he was going to split their skulls with his arrows, telling URU to save some for him. He ordered the rest to protect the young emperor and the Gauri. The Goguryeo troops rode hard across the field, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. The air crackled with anticipation as they closed in on the enemy's position. They were ready to fight. The soldier at the front pointed towards the horizon, his voice ringing out. He yelled that the enemy forces were over there, and the soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, bracing for the coming battle. The commander's voice cut through the chaos as he shouted to URU. He commanded URU to fire at once, his voice leaving no room for hesitation. The archers released their arrows, and the sky filled with whistling death. The arrows flew towards the enemy, each one carrying the promise of destruction. The battle had begun. The archer grinned, a flash of teeth in the heat of battle. He muttered that he could take down 2 with each arrow, clearly enjoying the carnage. He was right where he wanted to be. The archer took aim. His eyes narrowed in concentration. He released the arrow, sending it soaring into the sky, the first of many. The air crackled with anticipation as the archers prepared their next volley. The arrows rained down on the enemy soldiers, each one finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Men screamed as they fell, their armor offering little protection against the onslaught. The battlefield was quickly turning into a scene of chaos and death. The Goguryeo troops surged forward, their horses thundering across the battlefield. They were a force of nature, unstoppable in their advance. The general surveyed the battlefield, his expression grim. He knew what was coming, and he steeled himself for the fight ahead. The carriage sped along the road, surrounded by its protectors. The dust kicked up by the horses' hooves billowed around them, a sign of their desperate flight. The woman held the baby close, whispering, "It's all right. We're almost there." She tried to soothe the child, hoping to shield him from the danger that surrounded them. Suddenly, the carriage lurched violently, throwing the woman and baby against the side. The baby cried out in terror, the sound piercing the air. Tang forces were coming from the coastline too. Shield bearers were ordered to come forward and block them. The clash was unavoidable. The order to raise shields echoed across the line. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing the enemy's attack was about to crash against them. The commander shouted for the soldiers to hold the line at all costs. They stood firm, a wall of shields and spears against the coming storm. The Tang cavalry charged forward, a wave of horses and steel. Arrows rained down on the defenders, each impact a test of their resolve. The commander's voice boomed across the battlefield, urging them to hold back the enemy until the young emperor was safely aboard the ship. He yelled for them to endure until the great envoy arrived. The soldier slashed through the enemy ranks, his sword a blur of motion. Each strike was a desperate attempt to hold back the tide, a dance of death amidst the chaos. The Tang army advanced, a sea of soldiers beneath their banners. They seemed ready to crush anyone who stood in their way. Wei Cheng-hyun introduced himself as the true guard general of the great Tang Empire. He believed victory was already his. Wei Cheng-hyun offered them a deal, saying that if they surrendered, he would ask His Imperial Majesty to let them fight for the Tang Empire. He waited for their answer. An arrow flew towards Wei Cheng-hyun in response to his offer. Wei Cheng-hyun's face twisted in shock as the arrow pierced him. He had just begun to say he would make them his right hand, mistaking their intent. The arrow flew true, piercing right through Wei Cheng-hyun. The boastful general was silenced in an instant, his arrogance replaced with shock. He added that the guy looked just like Taizong, the same Taizong of Tang who lost an eye after being struck by an arrow in the Battle of Ansi Fortress. The leader gave a curt order. HWW, I should go. His tone left no room for argument. The man raised his sword high, yelling for all troops to ready themselves. The troops surged forward with a battle cry, weapons raised. The clash of steel and the screams of the wounded filled the air as the two armies collided. Wei Cheng-hyun's face was twisted in pain as he fell backwards, defeated. Below, the cavalry charged forward, ready to avenge their fallen general. The ground trembled beneath the hooves of the charging horses. The cavalry was like a storm, sweeping across the battlefield and crushing everything in their path. The soldiers braced themselves, forming a shield wall against the oncoming attack. The ship behind them loomed large, a symbol of hope and escape. The soldier's face was grim as he surveyed the battlefield, his eyes filled with a mix of determination and sorrow. All around him, bodies lay scattered, a stark reminder of the cost of war. A soldier shouted that the great army and the cavalry had arrived. A wave of relief washed over the troops as they saw their comrades charging onto the battlefield. Panic spread as the soldier yelled that the Tang troops were closing in fast. He ordered everyone to board the ships as quickly as possible. They needed to move like their feet were on fire if they wanted to escape. The ships sailed away from the beach, carrying the last remnants of the army. Every second counted, and the soldiers knew it. 2 soldiers stood guard on the deck, their eyes scanning the horizon. They knew the Tang troops wouldn't give up easily, so they had to stay alert. The fleet sailed onward, the setting sun casting long shadows across the water. Where they were going, no one knew, but they had to trust that it was better than what they were leaving behind. Despite all the chaos, the man held the sleeping baby close. He looked down at the child with a mix of worry and determination. He would do everything in his power to protect the young emperor. One of the armored soldiers asked what name His Majesty Yeolja gave the young emperor. The other soldier replied that His Majesty Yeolja named him Ulje. The first soldier acknowledged this and then asked what His Majesty's next command would be. The commander of the guards looked around urgently. He demanded to know where His Majesty was. Another soldier approached, holding out a scroll. He announced that His Majesty gave this to be delivered. The message read that His Majesty gave his final command to his younger brother. He was to take the child and the remaining survivors and go far, far away to live a peaceful life. The soldiers stood on the deck, gazing out at the horizon. They were sailing away, carrying out His Majesty's last command. Where they were going, no one knew, but they had to believe it was for the best. The text explained the meaning. This was an elder brother's last request to his younger kin. Wu Hyung was a humble term an older brother used when speaking to a younger brother. The soldier clenched the scroll, his expression hardening. He thought bitterly about how the man he could never bring himself to call brother now used that title to order him to flee. The soldier looked up at the commander, his face etched with worry. He asked what would become of Pyongyang Fortress now that they were retreating. Another soldier fell to his knees, begging the commander to kill him. The commander stared ahead, his face unreadable. A single drop of blood trickled down his cheek, a silent testament to the agony he felt at having to abandon their home. The commander stood tall, his armor gleaming in the dim light. Before him, a soldier knelt, head bowed in defeat. The commander stared down at the blood-stained scroll, the last orders he'd received. A fallen soldier lay nearby, a grim reminder of the cost of their retreat. The commander's face was etched with sorrow as he looked towards the burning city. He thought to himself that after 900 years of Gari, he couldn't protect them. The ship was caught in a raging storm, the waves crashing over the deck. It looked like they were about to be swallowed by the sea. The young emperor cried out, terrified by the storm. The ship rocked violently, threatening to throw him overboard. The ship fought against the storm, each wave threatening to swallow it whole. Many other ships struggled nearby, caught in the same watery hell. The storm's fury intensified as lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the ships below. The waves crashed down on them, threatening to drag them under. A massive wave crashed over the ship, sending it reeling. It felt like the ship was about to be torn apart. The ship was completely surrounded by the raging storm. It was all alone. The soldiers fought to keep their footing on the deck, grabbing for anything to hold on to. Desperate shouts rang out. Grab the rope! Get a grip, man! You trying to die? Tie the rope around your waist! The ship fought against the waves, tossed around like a toy. Someone yelled, ordering the helmsman to move it and not drift. One of the men looked up, shouting for the general. He needed to know what was happening. The general declared that they needed to turn the ship around. The order was given with urgency. The man looked absolutely terrified. He said he'd spent his whole life on the sea, but had never seen waves like this before. It was a massive wall of water that threatened to swallow them whole. The general yelled, ordering them to quickly turn the ship. The storm raged around them, making it almost impossible to hear anything. Nearby, someone watched the baby. The child seemed completely unaware of the danger, smiling innocently. One of the soldiers shouted that there was no way to turn back. They were completely cut off. The general screamed at the top of his lungs, ordering them to push through the massive waves. His voice was full of desperation. Another soldier raised his sword, declaring that this was His Majesty Yolja's will and the battle of the Gari Navy. He looked absolutely determined. The soldier stood firm against the storm, raising his sword high. Lightning crackled around the blade, but he didn't flinch, his eyes fixed on the raging waves ahead. The order to break through the dark echoed across the ship. The fleet was tossed about like toys in a bathtub, each ship fighting its own battle against the monstrous waves. The storm seemed determined to swallow them whole, and the air was thick with the roar of the wind and the crash of the sea. On deck, the soldiers clung to anything they could find, their faces grim but resolute. The wind howled around them, and the rain lashed down like whips, but they stood their ground, ready to obey the general's command. The water churned and foamed, a swirling mass of chaos that threatened to pull the ships under. Each wave was like a mountain crashing down, testing the strength of the vessels and the courage of the men aboard. The ships were caught in a maelstrom of wind and water, tossed about like toys. Waterspouts danced across the surface of the sea, each one a swirling tower of destruction. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the heart of the storm, washing over everything. It felt like the world itself was being torn apart. Someone called out to the young emperor, their voice barely audible over the storm. The general gripped his sword tightly, his knuckles white. He stood firm against the storm, a beacon of defiance in the face of nature's fury. The general grunted, his gaze softening as he looked down at the young emperor in his arms, who remained mercifully unaware of the danger surrounding them. The man carefully held the wrapped item in his arms, protecting it from harm. Whatever it was clearly important. The man looked around, confused. He wondered what had happened and why the mainland was still far away. The typhoon was gone, and it had gotten quiet all of a sudden. The man demanded that the others dock the ship if they saw land. He asked why they were staring like they had an arrow in their head, wondering what they were looking at. The man looked over at the land. He remarked on the nice view, but then noticed how huge the land was. No matter which way he turned, there was land. The man stared out at the strange landscape. He didn't know what to make of it. The man wondered when the sea had gotten so narrow. It didn't make any sense. The crew started to panic. One of them asked if they were in a lake, questioning the captain's sanity. Baru was told to calm down, but we couldn't believe the captain's actions. The great envoy asked what they should do. They realized this was clearly a lake, and they had set out from the open sea. Whatever had happened, they must be far from where they began, which meant the place was safe. The captain ordered the fleet to land. It was time to see where they had ended up. The troops began to land on the shore. It was time to find out what this new land held for them. The captain stared out at the new shoreline. He had no idea where they were. He wondered aloud where in the world they had ended up. The fleet had landed, and the troops were setting up camp along the shoreline. This new land was completely unknown to them, and the air felt different from anything they had ever experienced. Buru and Uru stepped forward, barking orders. They commanded the soldiers to scout the surroundings, preparing for anything. The troops responded immediately, ready to follow their instructions. The order was given to prepare for a possible ambush, and the soldiers moved quickly to form battle lines around their location. They understood the need for caution in this unknown territory. The captain of the guards received his orders. Report the current personnel count immediately. He understood the importance of knowing their numbers in this new, uncertain world. The troops stood in formation, ready for anything. They were an army, stranded in a strange land, but they were still a force to be reckoned with. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. Delete entire panel. The baby cried out loudly. Someone addressed him. Your Highness, don't call me that. After a pause. Understood. Then I'll just step aside for a moment. Someone asks, what's the matter? It seems you saw Sophie. Is that so? The three men stood around the baby, looking down at it. They seemed unsure of what to do next, their faces showing a mix of concern and curiosity. The man stared intently, his eyes narrowed with determination. He demanded that something be changed immediately, his expression leaving no room for argument. The three men looked down at the baby again, their faces now etched with worry. They seemed to realize the gravity of the situation, their concern growing with each passing moment. The man's voice boomed across the area, his face contorted with urgency. He shouted for someone to call the captain of the guards, his command echoing through the air. The man's voice was hoarse as he called out for the captain. He desperately needed the captain's leadership, his shout carrying a sense of urgency and desperation. The soldiers moved through the forest, their steps carefully planned. From above, their formation looked like a well-oiled machine, ready to strike at any moment. One soldier said they only needed one wild boar from Gojo Mountain, but then immediately contradicted himself, pointing out there wasn't even a single ant in sight. He then scolded someone else as a little brat for being rude to an elder. A soldier questioned why it was suddenly final again. He emphasized there was a huge difference at Gojo, saying that even if they came from the same batch, the one that came first. He then asked if someone had just heard that. One of the soldiers, wielding a large axe, ordered everyone to stay alert. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The others tensed, ready for whatever might come next. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their swords drawn and ready. The forest was silent around them, but the tension was thick in the air. They knew something was coming. The soldiers paused, listening intently to the sounds of the forest. One of them grinned, declaring that the noise meant they'd be having boar monster meat for dinner tonight. The sounds grew louder as the soldiers advanced deeper into the forest. They moved with caution, their weapons ready as they stalked their prey. The soldier barked an order, telling everyone to keep their eyes peeled. The others tensed, their grip tightening on their weapons. They questioned whether the pigs in this area walked on 2 legs. More importantly, they asked why those pigs were so blue. The soldier looked closely at the approaching figures. He asked if the others had noticed that they looked like they were all bruised. One of them shrugged, saying that the fact they walked on 2 legs and were blue didn't matter at all. He declared that as long as goju tasted good, that's all that mattered. The soldiers stood their ground, their boots planted firmly on the forest floor. The air crackled with tension as they waited for the creatures to approach. The soldiers grinned, looking down at the group of goblins. The goblins looked up at them with wide eyes, clearly scared. The soldiers were ready for a fight. With a burst of speed, the soldiers leaped into the air, closing the distance between them and the goblins in an instant. The goblins didn't even have time to react before the soldiers were upon them. The soldiers' scream echoed through the forest, a desperate cry for help, but the sound was abruptly cut short as a group of orcs appeared, their faces grim. The woman gasped for air, her chest heaving with each shallow breath. She was clearly struggling to keep it together as the situation spiraled out of control. A soldier yelled out, his voice filled with desperation. He was calling for the ambassador, hoping he could do something to help. The man stood his ground, his body tense and ready for a fight. He would protect the others, no matter what it took. Someone addressed the captain of the guards, their voice filled with concern. They reported that the child had changed, and no one could explain why. The man looked down, lost in thought. Meanwhile, in a room adorned with banners, the captain of the guards knelt before another man, a young girl standing nearby. The man's eyes widened as he looked at the scroll in his hands. Turns out, it was another letter from His Majesty Yahello, with instructions to deliver it once they reached their destination. The man with the sword asked if there were 2 letters. The captain of the guards apologized and confirmed that was correct. She was the daughter of Yul Rayuhwan, the captain of the guards, who stayed behind to protect me. The letter continued, explaining that was why I sent her to you. I apologize for deceiving you. The fortress was falling, engulfed in flames. It couldn't be helped. Someone had to make the call. Otherwise, everyone would have thrown their lives away trying to defend the indefensible. Though born of the emperor's bloodline, he didn't want to put someone like you, who has spent your life on the battlefield, through such cruelty. He wanted to reassure the man. He told him to not blame himself for failing to protect the country. It wasn't his fault. As I, who rose to the throne of Yahello, through a coup, Yahello admitted that his life was lived as a mere puppet of power. He had never truly been in control. He begged Yahello to let the ambassador live differently and to carry out everything according to his own will. Yahello's face was cold and unyielding. Then, a spray of blood filled the air. Yahello looked down at the bloodied sword in his hand. He then said he hoped that child would grow up well and become his partner. The ambassador stood tall, facing away from the horror he had just witnessed. He spoke softly, saying that His Majesty would grant him freedom. The guards moved in, surrounding the ambassador. They led him away, leaving Yahello alone with his thoughts. The man carefully held the baby in his arms, supporting its tiny head. His large hand gently touched the baby's cheek, a soft and caring gesture. The baby stared up with wide eyes, its face full of curiosity. The man watched the baby, his expression unreadable. The baby suddenly broke into a wide, toothless grin. The man's eyes softened as he looked at the baby's happy face. Someone asked the man to change the baby's diaper. He responded with a simple acknowledgement, ready to take on the task. He explained that she had stayed behind to protect the castle, following her husband, Ful Ryuhwan. The man stood there, looking up at the sky. He wondered what he had to do now, what his next move should be. He thought back to when he first picked up a sword at 6 years old. By 16, he was already on the battlefield, ready to fight. He remembered when they abandoned their homeland and fled. He was at the very front, fighting to protect everyone. As someone born from the emperor's bloodline, even if he was a bastard, his duty was clear. He had to protect the empire, no matter what it took. But now, standing on this strange shore, the reason for his existence seemed to have vanished. What was he supposed to do now? He stared up into the sky, the colors shifting above him. What then should he draw his sword for? What was his purpose here? Inside the tent, a scout reported on the surroundings. He had scouted the forest near Gojo, but found no enemies. The scout reported that the atmosphere of the forest was different from Dong or Sila. Some of the trees looked a bit different too. But the strangest thing was the creatures walking on two legs. The general looked absolutely furious. He demanded to know what the meaning of the interruption was. Had an enemy appeared? The soldier stammered, his eyes wide with fear. It seemed heaven was angered. What? Heaven was angered? The soldier hesitated, unsure of what to say. He looked up at the sky, trying to find the right words to describe what he was seeing. The soldier finally spoke, pointing up at the sky. He said that the moon had given birth, and the offspring were twins. He looked at the others with a strange expression. The soldier looked up at the sky in disbelief. He pointed out that the moon wasn't giving birth, and the stars were different too. It was like they were in a completely different world. The other man listened carefully, taking in the bizarre news. The officer tried to remain calm, saying that at least they didn't have to worry about the Tang army right now. The other soldier agreed, but his face showed he wasn't convinced. The officer repeated himself as if to convince himself. Delete entire description. The S name was displayed. Delete entire description. The orcs charged, weapons raised, ready to attack. One of them yelled at the pig, demanding to know where it thought it was going, and triumphantly announced that he had caught the blue pig. A man stood firm, his expression stern. He commanded the pig to hold still, his voice filled with authority. The man frowned, deep in thought. He wondered if the pigs here walked on two legs naturally, or if they were actually people wearing pig masks. The orcs continued their assault on the pig, swinging their weapons wildly. The pig, surprisingly, kept repeating, "Let's talk human," over and over. One of the men commented that the pigs sounded like they were talking like people. The other man looked at him strangely, asking what he was talking about and if he had ever seen a pig talk. The first man paused, then admitted that was true. The man tickled the orc relentlessly, telling him to hurry up and just die already. The orc screamed from the tickling, squirming in the man's grasp, desperate for it to stop. The man continued to beat on the orc, unimpressed by the screaming. He found the whole thing pretty noisy, actually, like the orc was doing it on purpose to annoy him. One of the men wondered what was going on. The other man replied that they were performing some kind of ritual, though what kind, he didn't know. Woo! And another man continued to beat the pig. One of them wondered why they were tickling it, suggesting a smiling sacrifice would be better. He then told URU to tickle him properly, because they had to keep him smiling. Great Lion told BURU and URU to stop what they were doing. BURU asked why he was interrupting them. Great Lion said they could do the ritual later, because they needed food first. The man with the axe was told that since the pig was blue, it might be sick. Suddenly, a voice called out. The general sighed, asking what it was this time. Had a dog or a cow started walking on two legs? He then asked how they even knew about it. Everyone stared in stunned silence. The air crackled with tension as they tried to process what they were seeing. Anyway, back to the action. The order was given to grab weapons. One of the soldiers asked what that thing was. He wondered how a cow could walk on two legs. The command to block them echoed through the ranks. The soldiers braced themselves, raising their shields to form a wall against the incoming threat. The creature charged forward, its massive frame eating up the distance. The order to throw was barked out. Instantly, a volley of spears flew through the air, aimed at the charging creature. The fight raged on, a chaotic dance of steel and fury. But for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. The spears found their mark, piercing the creature's thick hide. Fury twisted his face as he watched the battle unfold. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of soldiers and strange creatures, locked in a deadly struggle. The horned creature was caught in a brutal assault. Steel flashed as the soldiers pressed their attack, their weapons finding their mark. The fight went on. The man yelled, confused by the situation. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He shouted at the soldiers to shoot their arrows at the cow, demanding to know what they were all doing. Arrows flew, piercing the creature's hide. The impact of the arrows caused the beast to stumble back, roaring in pain. The man looked closely at the rope. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. He wondered if someone was trying to start a power struggle with him. The man didn't hesitate. He yelled for the soldiers to fire. The rope weapon shot forward with deadly speed. The arrows rained down on the horned creature, each one finding its mark. The force of the arrows caused the beast to stagger. The horned creature knelt on the ground, defeated. Arrows stuck out from its body, a testament to the soldier's deadly aim. The man screamed at the cow-like creature, calling it a bastard and commanding it to die. He watched as the creature fell, finally defeated. The horned creature lay lifeless on the ground, a pool of blood spreading around it. The arrows that had struck it were now still, marking the end of the fight. The man stood over the fallen beast, his large axe dripping with blood. He had won, but the fight had clearly taken its toll. The silence hung heavy in the air. URU asked if it was okay to eat the cow bastard. He added that the great lion wouldn't tell them not to eat it again, right? The man was shocked. There were 3 more of those creatures, and now there was even a dog running around. The battle was a mess of blood and steel. Creatures and warriors clashed, each blow carrying the weight of desperation. The ground was littered with bodies. Someone called out to URU, suggesting they split up and take them out half and half. Then they wondered who would get the last one. The other man shrugged and replied, "Who knows?" A warrior's sword flashed, cutting through one of the creatures with ease. The impact echoed through the air. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of death. Each warrior fought with everything they had, their faces grim with determination. The Minotaur roared, ready to charge. The warrior stood his ground, his sword gleaming in the dim light. He wasn't going to back down from this fight. The warrior's sword flashed, slicing across the Minotaur's chest. Dark blood sprayed into the air as the beast staggered back, roaring in pain. The warrior didn't let up. The warrior looked up, his face etched with concern. Something wasn't right. He could feel it in the air. Another warrior struck a creature hard, his fist connecting with a sickening thud. The force of the blow sent the monster stumbling back. He wasn't messing around. The warrior plunged his sword deep into the monster's back. The creature let out a final, guttural cry as it collapsed to the ground. The fight was far from over, but this one was done. The warrior didn't waste any time. He swung his sword with incredible speed, slicing right through the Minotaur's chest. Blood sprayed everywhere as the beast roared in pain. The Minotaur crashed to the ground, defeated. The warrior stood over the fallen beast, panting slightly. The battle had been fierce, but he had come out on top. The rest of the warriors arrived, surveying the scene. The ground was littered with the bodies of Minotaurs and horses, a testament to the battle that had just taken place. They had won, but at a cost. One of the warriors spoke up, explaining the strange sensation. He said that the gravity here was weak, which is why their armor, weapons, and even their own bodies felt lighter than usual. The other warrior listened intently, processing the information. So that's why, he thought. It all made sense now. This new world was full of surprises. The warrior didn't hesitate. He swung his sword down, slicing the Minotaur from shoulder to waist. Blood splattered as the beast roared in pain. The ground shook violently as the massive Minotaur crashed down. Dust and debris flew everywhere as the earth cracked under the weight. The Minotaur looked down at its chest, confused. How could he have lost so easily? He didn't understand what was happening. The warrior calmly sheathed his sword, the metal sliding smoothly into the scabbard. Blood dripped from the blade, a testament to his victory. The warrior gripped the hilt of his sword, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought to himself that those Tang bastards wouldn't stand a chance against him right now. What a shame. The soldier didn't hesitate. He drove his blade into the werewolf, piercing its chest. The creature screamed in pain, blood spurting from the wound. The remaining werewolves charged forward, their claws bared and teeth snapping. The soldiers braced themselves, knowing they were outnumbered and outmatched. The air filled with the sounds of battle. The leader ordered Buru to chase down the remaining enemies and wipe them out. He also told him to expand the search area and find out what else was out there. Buru simply replied that he understood. The forest stretched out before them, a sea of green that seemed to go on forever. The trees were tall and thick, their branches intertwined to create a canopy that blocked out the sun. It was a place of mystery and danger. The man yelled for Sarah to get the village. He then called out for Mr. Varen. Something was definitely wrong, and they needed to act fast. The man yelled for them to hurry. Below, the woman looked terrified, tears streaming down her face, clearly in a panic. The man notched an arrow, pulling back the string with practiced ease. He scanned the forest, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he prepared for whatever was coming. He spotted the ogre in the distance, its massive form lumbering through the trees. The hunter knew he had to act fast if he wanted to protect the woman. The hunter yelled at the ogre, calling it a stupid ogre and daring it to come closer. He was trying to draw its attention away from the woman. The ogre roared in pain, the arrow sticking out of its shoulder. It looked absolutely furious. He called out desperately to someone, his words trailing off. The world seemed to hold its breath for a moment. Time stood still. Sarah tripped and fell hard, sprawling onto the forest floor. The ground rushed up to meet her face. The man yelled at the ogre, cursing it and daring it to come eat him instead. Sarah screamed, "No!" a sound of pure terror. He grabbed Sarah and ran as fast as he could through the trees. He had to get get her away from whatever was out there. He looked at something in the distance. What's that thing? It's bigger than a cow, he said, alarmed. Sarah started to regain consciousness, making confused sounds. Huh? W, she mumbled weakly. A dwarf appeared before them. You were in danger, young lady, the dwarf said to Sarah. The man stared in shock. A dwarf? He exclaimed. The dwarf stammered, barely able to speak. Eminai, that was close. Eminai looked at him in disbelief. Dwarf? Eminai gave the dwarf a strange look, clearly confused. Dwarf? What's that supposed to mean? Suddenly, a voice shouted a warning. The dwarf looked up, startled. The ground shook as something massive crashed down. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere from the impact. Back in the forest, the dwarf continued to carry EMI-NAI, looking around cautiously. The girl's eyes widened in horror as she looked down at the body. Reflected in her pupils, she saw the figure responsible for the brutal attack. The attacker swung down with incredible force, the blade slicing through the body. A spray of blood and gore filled the air as the body split apart. The man and the girl stood frozen, their faces etched with disbelief. The scene before them was a gruesome display of power. The man yelled in disbelief as he watched the ogre fall. It was unbelievable. The ogre went down in one hit. The man stood over the fallen ogre, breathing heavily. The air was thick with the smell of blood and death. The story continues. Someone observed that it must be high order, EMINNAI, commenting that it wasn't bad. BRU spoke in what seemed like another language. Great Rune, BRU, Nalere, Irene, BRU, which was translated as asking for forgiveness and thanking the Earth Clan. Back at the camp, soldiers were moving around. Someone told Soraya not to worry. Soraya told her uncle that she was too hurt to move. She insisted that he escape and warned the village. The uncle refused to leave her alone. He told her to stop babbling. The uncle told Soraya to speak so he could understand her. He tried to reassure her, saying that if an orc bites you, but you keep your wits, you survive, right? He was clearly trying to stay positive. Someone noticed a woman with golden hair. Her skin was so pale, it was almost unreal. He wondered if all the locals were this gorgeous, and if this was the West. The man doubted that the people were punitive force soldiers. He reasoned that there were no black hair, black eye troops in the kingdom. He was trying to figure out who they were. Ji Woong Sam told someone to beat it, clearly annoyed by their staring. He looked absolutely furious. The camp was a hive of activity, soldiers running in every direction. It seemed like something big was about to happen. Ji Woong Sam tried to communicate with the locals. Locals, I guess. Guiltio, can you understand us? He asked, trying to figure out if they could communicate. Guiltio replied that High Order had told them his name, but he couldn't grasp anything else they were saying. The group waited, watching Ji Woong Sam try to make sense of the situation. They needed to figure out where they were and how to get back home. He realized that they didn't know exactly where they were. He shouted to the soldiers. Besides the walking pigs and cows, the man realized that to get any useful information, they needed to find a way to talk to the people who lived here. Without words, they were lost. The group sat there, thinking, but one of them said they'd figure something out. Somehow, they had to. Suddenly, one of the men shouted that he had an idea. He grinned, looking confident. The lad with them was a genius who knew every tongue. One of the men declared that Ji Woong Sam should speak for them. He explained that this was Ji Woong Sam, addressing someone with respect. Ji Woong Sam was introduced as the man who knew every language under heaven. It was a bold claim, but he looked confident. Someone asked if that was really true. Another man affirmed it, explaining that Ji Woong Sam had traveled west with his merchant parents and picked up every foreign tongue along the way. Someone suggested they try talking to the locals. The group agreed enthusiastically, ready to let Ji Woong Sam put his skills to the test. Ji Woong Sam thought to himself that this was his chance to finally prove his worth to the group. Ji Woong Sam declared that he had traveled everywhere, from Great Jin to Wa Koku. He boasted that there was no place he hadn't been, and no language he didn't know. Ji Woong Sam tried to greet the blonde woman, attempting to speak French, but it didn't go well, and he quickly stopped himself, realizing it wasn't working. Ji Woong Sam realized that French wasn't the right choice. He admitted that it was a no-go, while the blonde woman looked even more puzzled. Ji Woong Sam tried again, this time attempting English. He greeted her with a drawn-out hello, but she still didn't understand. Ji Woong Sam, not giving up, suggested a cheek-to-cheek greeting. He moved in close, but the blonde woman looked completely shocked, unsure how to react. The blonde woman watched the man with the ponytail and wondered what he was doing. The others just stood there silently, also unsure unsure of what was happening. The man with the ponytail suddenly looked scared. The other man looked absolutely furious. Wung Sam tried speaking in different languages, hoping one would work. He tried Spanish, French, Arabic, German, and even some kind of tribal dialect. Someone laughed nervously and addressed the envoy, saying, "Here's the thing. They seemed to be trying to explain or excuse what was happening." Someone sighed and said they forgot URL was useless outside of battle. They warned URL not to claim he wrote the ulji in front of people, calling it embarrassing. Delete, verify, or remove missing OCR data. One of the women stepped forward, a determined look on her face. She offered to try something, though it wasn't clear what she had in mind. She stated her name, Yeon Chuaga Ram, slowly said his name, Yeon H-B-I-G-A Ram. The woman seemed surprised and asked if his name was Yeon Shuai-Ge Ram. Yeon Shui-Ga Ram, then asked the woman for her name. She paused for a moment before answering simply, Sarah. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, finally understanding that her name was Sarah. Yeon Shui-Ge Ram looked absolutely pissed. He realized that was all it took, and he already knew her name. He was frustrated, muttering that he had even called her name twice before. Someone was talking to BRU, thanking him and commenting on his good memory. The speaker was laughing heartily, clearly in high spirits. One of the men dismissed BRU's behavior, saying he was just talking nonsense and that they should let him have his fun. He suggested they call it a day. The man interrupted, saying he still had something to take care of. He looked determined. Night had fallen over the military camp, casting long shadows across the tents. The air was still, but the camp was bustling with activity. Inside one of the tents, two men sat at a table, the only light coming from a flickering candle. The atmosphere was tense, as if they were discussing something important. Baron Alvin sat at his table, calmly eating his food. He seemed unfazed by the chaos around him, already planning his next move. Night, Yuk Lion Teluman stood nearby, his armor gleaming in the dim light. He watched the Baron with a stern expression, ready to carry out whatever orders came his way. He reported that the mercenary band would soon seize the farming village, and referred to those fleeing the kingdom as vermin. He declared that he would make them pay for that. The military encampment bustled with activity, soldiers moving about their duties. Tents dotted the landscape, a testament to the organized chaos of a camp preparing for movement. One of the men asked if they were leaving the next day. The other, addressed as General, confirmed that they were. The general explained that, strangely, Sarah was following Blue and Yu. A man's voice called out, announcing that he was there and telling someone to come in. Someone said purity, simplicity, aha, as the realization seemed to dawn on them. Someone instructed them to go to the village. Sarah said she understood. The speaker refused to let her go alone. He told Sarah that Demudiok. Sarah asked why all of a sudden, since Yu needs to organize information about that place. Faran Sarah responded enthusiastically to Gojo's earlier comment, exclaiming about its deep meaning. She acknowledged that she thought Gojo didn't trust her, then laughed it off. Gojo thought to himself that he couldn't trust Sarah at all, except in combat. The travelers moved through the night, the landscape stretching out before them. The stars shone brightly above, guiding them on their way. The logo of Vortex appeared, a reminder of the source. The captain of the guards, Daimudeoke, explained that he had a mountain of work to do at the camp. He told Sarah and Wu to go and come back safely this time, reassuring them not to worry. The Vortex logo appeared, a reminder of where I was seeing all this. The orcs marched forward, pushing a cart loaded with supplies. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of their feet on the ground. The Vortex logo appeared once more. One of the soldiers pointed into the distance and shouted, "I can see the village over there." "Everyone stop," someone shouted. "Hey, liar." The soldiers tensed, ready for anything. The man questioned if his harsh training was just a bonus, wondering if they even learned to speak in 10 days. He looked absolutely furious. The man riding the horse groaned, clearly annoyed. The other man shouted that they should stop talking and just ask if that was the right village, making sure his order was understood. The soldiers rode on, a tense silence hanging in the air. They were getting closer to the village, and everyone was on edge. Sam said that the villagers might be surprised, so Sarah and he would go first to explain the situation. He thanked Buru. A duck quacked nearby. Buru looked absolutely furious, his face contorted with rage. He swung his axe down at the man on the horse, shouting, asking if he thought he was equal to him and where he got off talking like that. Buru suddenly realized he was about to thank the guy, but he was still pissed that the guy used casual speech, calling him a little punk for it. Someone told Buru to stop, saying he was scaring the kid. Sarah didn't even seem surprised by his outburst. The man on the ground had a creepy smile on his face. He seemed to be enjoying the chaos. Buru came to the conclusion that saying thank you scares people. He figured he needed to warn the villagers about that first thing when they arrived. The village entrance was completely empty, not a soul in sight. An eerie quiet hung in the air, broken only by the gentle breeze. The man and woman walked into the village, looking around in confusion. The man wondered out loud where everyone had gone. Someone pointed towards the main square, urging them to hurry. There was a sense of urgency in their gesture, as if something important was happening there. They made their way to the village square, the buildings around them casting long shadows. The air was thick with anticipation, a feeling that something was about to happen. The man suddenly put a finger to the woman's lips, silencing her. He looked around cautiously, as if afraid of being overheard. The village chief looked up at Captain Miorin, demanding an explanation. He couldn't understand why Miorin hadn't stopped the orc horde, especially after promising to do so in exchange for food and money. A group of armed men stood behind Miorin, watching the scene unfold. The man leaned in close to the village chief, a sneer on his face. He wondered if the village chief was just naive because he was a farmer, or if he was simply too old and dull to understand what was happening. The man wrapped an arm around the village chief, his voice dripping with false concern. He explained that risking their lives to fight orcs wasn't worth it when they could make easy money by capturing everyone in the village. He chuckled at the thought. The man's expression hardened as he turned to his men, issuing orders. He told them not to injure the women and to avoid crippling the men, emphasizing the importance of their commodity value. The man's voice was cold and ruthless as he gave the final command. He ordered his men to kill anyone without commodity value. A group of villagers screamed as the mercenaries attacked, their cries echoing through the village square. The villagers screamed and begged for their lives as the mercenaries swarmed them. They cried out to their fathers, hoping someone would save them from this nightmare. A mother held her baby tight, tears streaming down her face. She begged the man to at least spare her child, clinging to the hope that some shred of decency remained. The man sneered down at her, his eyes cold. He told her it all depended on what she did. His words like a slap in the face. Without a second thought, the man kicked the woman. She went crashing to the ground, still desperately trying to shield her baby from the violence. A man screamed at the mercenary, calling him a bastard, but the mercenary didn't even flinch, continuing to kick the person on the ground with brutal force. The mercenary grinned, his teeth bared. He asked the village chief if living as a slave wasn't better than being eaten alive by orcs, his words dripping with sarcasm. All around, the villagers were getting beaten to the ground, their faces contorted in pain as the mercenaries kicked and punched them without mercy. The village chief, lying on the ground, lamented their decision to flee the kingdom's tyranny. He realized it was a mistake to trust people so easily, his voice filled with regret. He weakly warned Varen and Sarah to never come to this place. His words were a desperate plea, hoping to protect them from the horrors he was now facing. The village chief closed his eyes, wishing that at least those two would be safe from harm. His body was battered, but his spirit still held on to a flicker of hope. The village chief urged Sarah to quickly go and inform others about what was happening. He then turned to the unknown man and asked what he was going to do. The man said he would buy as much time as he could until they arrived. The man's face was grim as he thought about the upcoming fight. He knew he had to hold out as long as possible. He had to buy as much time as he could. Sarah looked surprised, clearly worried about what he was planning to do. She didn't want to leave him behind to face whatever was coming. She started to say something, but hesitated. Suddenly, a creepy voice echoed through the village. A man with a sinister smile appeared, his eyes gleaming with malice. He asked if there were little mice around, his words dripping with a disturbing undertone. The two people lay on the ground, defeated. One of them was bleeding, his face a mask of pain. One of the men reported to Captain that they had found her behind the barracks. He told him to deal with it. The injured woman remained on the ground, helpless. The man with the sinister smile grabbed the woman. He told her to come with him, his voice dripping with malice. The woman screamed, terrified. Suddenly, a man kicked the attacker, yelling at him to get out of the way. The kick sent the attacker flying. He grunted in pain. The attacker screamed as he was sent flying by the kick. The woman continued to scream, still terrified by what was happening. The force of the kick echoed through the air. The woman watched the man who had grabbed her. She had been terrified only moments before. Now, she looked down at him as he lay on the ground, defeated. The next moment, the man looked up, his face a mask of shock. He exclaimed something. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A heavily armored dwarf rode towards them on horseback. He looked like a force to be reckoned with. The man wondered. The dwarf rode confidently through the chaos. He seemed unfazed by the carnage around him. Someone shouted something something. The sound of hooves echoed through the village as a dwarf rode into town on horseback. People turned to see what was happening. The man, who was captain, asked Eminai if she was okay. He told her that this place was dangerous and that she should take Baron and get out of here. EM-NA. I looked worried. Suddenly, someone shouted for everyone to brace themselves. It looked like something bad was about to happen. The men looked up, their faces etched with confusion. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. A spear was pointed straight at them. The attack was about to begin. The commander roared, ordering his troops to beat the old guys and treat them like animals. He yelled that if they're armed, they should finish them off. Above, a warrior swung his sword down on someone. Suddenly, the cavalry charged forward, a wave of mounted soldiers thundering across the field. The ground shook as they rode. Fear gripped the villagers as they recognized the approaching force. Someone shouted that it was a dwarf, the extermination troops. He wondered what was happening as they came closer. Above, the dwarf fought. The attacker swung his sword, catching his target off guard. The strike sent the man flying. The battle turned brutal as the attackers showed no mercy. Someone yelled to kill them all. The villagers screamed, begging for their lives. The soldier couldn't believe his eyes. He wondered if the kingdom had sent a night order. He was shocked, saying that the extermination force couldn't have gone this far. He stammered, stating that 2 armies was impossible, as he had never seen knights like those. He'd never heard of such a knightly order in the kingdom or on the continent, wondering what on earth was going on. The soldier yelled, telling the captain to make for the region quickly, but suddenly he was struck by a volley of arrows. He realized it was the crossbow of the world, the quarrel crossbolt, as he fell from his horse. The soldier pointed up, wondering where on earth those were coming from. He screamed as he was hit, yelling to the captain to look over there. The captain was shocked, saying that this couldn't be. He saw the archer cavalry, realizing that the arrows flying range where all archers aim quarrels. Wouldn't that? The captain cursed, realizing that if they wanted to live, they had to get out of here. He ordered them to fall back to the back gate and abandon the slaves. He yelled at someone running off, demanding to know where they thought they were going. The cavalry charged forward, trampling over the fallen. The ground was littered with bodies, but they didn't slow down for a second. The man swung his hammer with furious speed. He screamed at the fleeing soldiers, demanding to know where they thought they were going, ordering them to kill the enemy. JJALTUNG's face twisted in rage. He was furious that someone had called him shorty, his least favorite word, and screamed at the offender to shut up. The cavalry thundered onward, their horses' hooves pounding the earth. A voice roared above the chaos, ordering them to kill the enemy without mercy. The attacker's fist connected with brutal force. The impact sent shockwaves through the victim, leaving no doubt about the attacker's intent. The soldiers ran as fast as they could, trying to get away. The leader watched them go, his face showing how surprised he was. The man screamed, warning that a dwarf was coming. Above him, the dwarf fell from the sky, crashing down. The dwarf's sword came down, stabbing right through one of the soldiers. The attack was quick and deadly. The man yelled at his troops, ordering them to do whatever it took to stop the dwarf. The dwarf was a major problem. The man with the axe watched the soldiers run, saying that they were doing a good job at running away fast, even better than regular soldiers. He thought it was ridiculous. Knights rode forward on their horses, their swords ready. They were getting ready to fight. The leader ordered his troops to take out the brats up front. He looked absolutely furious. The soldiers fought with everything they had, their swords meeting with deadly force. Blood splattered everywhere. The man told his troops not to waste time on those who were running away. He said there was an URU nearby that they needed to capture. The men picked up the pace on their horses, rushing to report what they'd seen. They had to tell Baron Alvin right away. Arrows rained down on the trench, finding their marks with deadly accuracy. The archers showed no mercy, their arrows piercing through flesh and bone. The kick landed with a sickening thud, sending the man sprawling to the ground. He landed hard, the air knocked out of him. He lay motionless on the ground, several arrows sticking out of his body. Blood seeped from the wounds, staining the earth around him. Another arrow was drawn back, the archer's hand steady and firm. He aimed carefully, preparing to unleash another deadly shot. The man's eyes widened in terror. He screamed, pointing with a shaking hand. Below, the archer remained focused, his arrow aimed and ready. The archer readied his arrow, his eyes focused on the target, but the man told him to turn back, his voice laced with urgency. The village was quiet. The village was a scene of death. Bodies littered the ground, a testament to the brutal attack. The villagers cried out in despair, huddling around their dead. They begged for mercy, their voices filled with terror. They knew that the most dangerous creature of all was man. But then, a voice cut through the despair, urging everyone to calm down. Someone announced that these people had come to help them. The villagers looked at Baron, asking if it was true. They thought that these people were soldiers from the extermination force, and that they were saved. One of the men yelled at someone to get an interpreter and relay what the envoy was saying properly. He seemed really angry about it. He was pacing back and forth, and his face was red. Baru was told that they would talk later. One of the men with him asked if he saw something over there, but the other man said he didn't see anything. They were squinting, trying to see in the distance. The men were staring off into the distance, trying to make out what they were seeing. One of them exclaimed that he knew what they were looking at. He looked shocked by it. The blue orcs were coming. They were screaming and yelling as they charged forward. The villagers were scared, and they started running in the opposite direction. A man rode fast on horseback, kicking up dust. He shouted, laughing like he had already won. The man looked down, his face grim. He seemed troubled by something he had seen. The man yelled that he had to tell the great lord what was happening. In the background, some orcs were running and screaming. Under the dark sky, a man walked through the forest. The trees loomed over him, and the air was cold. A horde of orcs was charging forward, screaming. But then, a man yelled at the top of his lungs, calling someone a liar. The man ordered everyone to gather up every able-bodied man with a bow. The soldiers responded, yelling. Far away, the horde of orcs advanced, grunting and snarling as they moved through the forest. Their numbers seemed endless. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming. One of the archers looked at his bow with confusion. He wondered what he was supposed to shoot with, since it wasn't a wooden bow. The man yelled, calling someone a liar. He ordered them to signal their white-haired friends when he gave the signal. He then demanded to know how many arrows were left. The soldiers reported their remaining arrows. 5, 7, 6. The man in charge listened intently, then ordered them to gather every last arrow into their quivers. Deep in the forest, the horde of orcs continued their advance. Their grunts echoed through the trees as they moved closer to the village. One of the archers looked at the advancing horde, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew the bows were good, but could they really take down that many orcs from this far away? Suddenly, a chorus of screams erupted from the orc ranks. Something had them terrified. The archer grimly stated the obvious. If they didn't take down at least 2 orcs with every shot, they were all doomed. The odds were stacked against them. The order to fire rang out, and the archers released their arrows. The arrows flew with deadly speed, striking the orcs with brutal force. Deep within the forest, the orcs were suddenly ambushed. Something tore through their ranks, and they didn't even know what was happening. The man watched in disbelief as the orcs fell, unable to even see the arrows. He realized that these weren't just bows, they were magic items. He immediately ordered the Ghost Horse Brigade to follow him. He sprinted towards the door, his face etched with urgency. He had to get to the general. He shouted for the general, his voice filled with desperation. He needed to tell him what was happening. The man's eyes went wide as he shouted something. He looked absolutely terrified. Suddenly, the orcs were caught in a deadly ambush. They were being torn apart, not even knowing what hit them. The attack was clearly a hit and run. The enemy struck hard and fast, leaving the orcs in disarray. The orc laughed like a maniac. He cackled. The orc roared. He looked eager to chase down his prey. The orcs charged through the forest, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground. They ran as fast as they could, eager to get to the fight. An orc fell from the sky, taken completely by surprise. Below him, the men on horseback were ready for the next attack. The orcs stood their ground, weapons ready. Suddenly, one of them looked up, his face showing confusion. He wondered what was going on. Chief Mukable roared, threatening to tear apart anyone who dared to run from the humans. He was determined to lead his horde to victory. The orc raised his weapon high, promising victory to those who fought with him. He urged the warriors to show the humans the true valor of the orcs. Chief Mukable, the hero and strategist, roared out a command to his army. The orcs responded with a deafening cheer, shouting his name over and over. Chief Mukable's eyes burned with fury as he gave the order. He commanded them to split into 4 groups and attack the village without mercy. The orcs surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. They raced toward the village, eager to spill blood and cause chaos. One of the men looked completely shocked. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Panic set in as the men realized the danger. Someone shouted for everyone to hurry back to the village and prepare for the attack. The orc roared, a guttural sound that echoed through the trees. He towered over the fence, ready to attack anyone who dared to stand in his way. The spear thrust forward with deadly speed. The orc didn't hesitate, driving the weapon straight through the man, felling him instantly. The orc stood over his fallen foe, blood dripping from his spear. He snarled, promising death to anyone else who dared to oppose him. The man lay motionless on the ground, his life extinguished in an instant. The scene of the attack was gruesome, a testament to the orc's brutal strength. Suddenly, the orc screamed in agony as an arrow pierced his arm. He stumbled back, clutching the wound and roaring in pain. The archer watched in desperation as the injured man groaned, barely conscious. He shouted something, trying to shake him awake. The archer cursed under his breath. Damn it, he thought. They were running out of time, and men. The battle raged on around them. The archer watched as more orcs swarmed forward, their numbers overwhelming the remaining soldiers. The archer grabbed the injured man by the shoulder, trying to get him back in the fight. He said something. The battlefield was a scene of carnage, with bodies strewn across the ground. The remaining soldiers fought with grim determination, knowing their survival depended on it. The soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing they were outnumbered. One of them yelled, ordering everyone to push the orcs outside, because if they broke through, they were all screwed. The orcs crashed into the village, attacking anyone they could find. A villager watched in terror as one of the monsters charged toward him, teeth bared. The soldier swung his weapon, knocking the orc back. He cursed at the monster, demanding to know who gave those pig bastards permission to even speak. He was starting to feel like things were getting out of hand. The soldier gritted his teeth, striking down another orc. He yelled to his comrades that they'd killed maybe 200 of the monsters, but another 400 had just shown up to take their place. The soldier dodged a blow and slashed at an orc's leg. He told the others that at this rate, it would be impossible to hold out until reinforcements arrived. If it were just them, they could run, but they couldn't leave the villagers behind. The orcs swarmed the village, their crude weapons crashing against anything in their path. The villagers fought back desperately, knowing what was at stake if the line broke. The man gritted his teeth, swinging his axe with renewed determination. He knew they were in a tough spot, but he yelled that they just had to hold out, no matter what. Another soldier struck down an orc, his face set with grim resolve. He agreed, saying that running away from pigs wasn't something a man of Gari would ever do. From the forest, Chief Mukable roared, his voice echoing across the battlefield as he gave the order to charge. The horde surged forward, a green tide crashing against the village defenses. The soldier braced himself, his muscles tensing as he prepared for the inevitable clash. He roared, ready to meet the charge head. The soldier stood over the orc he had just killed, the monster's body pinned to the ground by the wooden spikes. He knew they couldn't give up, no matter how bad things got. They just had to hang in there. The soldiers stood their ground, spears ready, over the body of the fallen orc. One of them scoffed, saying that a real warrior wouldn't run from a pig like that. That's not what a man from Gari would do. From the darkness of the trees, Chief Mukable roared, his voice full of fury, as he ordered the horde to charge. The orcs surged forward, a wave of green muscle and crude weapons crashing towards the village. The soldiers braced themselves, preparing for the inevitable impact. Meanwhile, the orcs continued their relentless charge, their numbers seemingly endless. The two soldiers suddenly turned their heads, their eyes widening in surprise. One of them muttered, pointing towards the horizon, calling out for the Grand Envoy. The orc army stood ready, spears glinting in the dim light of the forest. They were ready to meet their enemies in battle, their numbers seemingly endless. The orc leader threw his head back and laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees. He was enjoying the thought of the upcoming battle, confident in his army's strength. The orcs laughed along with their leader. He ordered them to resume the pig hunt, eager to chase down the remaining villagers. The orcs swarmed the village, their crude weapons raised high. They were determined to kill every last villager, enjoying the terror they inflicted. The orcs continued their assault, their battle cries filling the air. The villagers screamed in terror as they were cut down, unable to defend themselves against the overwhelming force. The orcs began to move into a wedge formation, their spears pointed forward. They were ready to meet the enemy head-on, trusting in their numbers and strength. An orc squealed, spotting the approaching human cavalry. The orcs braced themselves, knowing the battle was about to begin. Very Lokwi, Varnaza, the strategist revolutionary of the orcs, announced himself, declaring he had spent his life preparing for this day. He told them that no matter how skilled the knights were, they'd never break through their wall of brave warriors, urging them to stand together and live, or scatter and die. The orcs began to chant, calling out for Mukul to unite. They raised their weapons, ready to fight as one. The orcs continued their chant, the sound echoing through the forest. They were ready to face whatever came next, their determination unwavering. The orcs continued to chant, calling out for Mukul to unite them. They raised their weapons high, ready to fight as one. The orcs kept chanting, but one of them wondered what the cavalry was doing. Another orc yelled that the cavalry would be crushed against their wall. The soldier realized that if the cavalry ran into the orc wall, they would be flung away. He found them to be a strange bunch. The Ghost Horse Brigade charged forward at full speed, ready to break through the orc lines. The Ghost Horse Brigade continued their charge, their speed and determination unwavering. The orcs stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and steel. They were ready to meet the charge of the Ghost Horse Brigade head-on, confident in their numbers and strength. An orc stood atop a rocky cliff, watching the human cavalry approach. He yelled that the human cavalry was running away from their might, mocking their supposed valor. The orcs roared with approval, their voices blending into a thunderous cheer. They chanted for the glory of the orcs, their excitement reaching a fever pitch. The man smirked, addressing the archers under his command. He asked them if they could possibly miss a target they could hit with their eyes closed, confident in their skill. The archers drew their bows, aiming with deadly precision. At the man's command, they released a volley of arrows, sending a storm of projectiles hurtling towards the enemy. The arrows rained down on the orcs, piercing through their armor. Many fell to the ground, defeated before they could even reach the village. Chief Mukabal stood atop a rock, watching the human cavalry. He noted that they were moving as expected, playing right into their trap. Chief Mukabal roared, his voice filled with urgency. He screamed at his warriors to scatter, hoping to minimize the damage. The archers' volleys continued to tear through the orc ranks. Orcs scattered in every direction, trying to avoid the deadly rain of arrows. The commander watched the orcs scatter, a smirk playing on his lips. He explained to his companion that they had foolishly banded together, making themselves easy targets. Very Lokwi, Rivarniza, declared that they were launching a full offensive counterattack. The orc general screamed for his soldiers to charge. Mukabal yelled for his warriors to form up. He urged them to unite and stand together against the enemy. The commander ordered the archers to loose their arrows. He then commanded them to scatter and disperse to avoid being caught in the counterattack. Mukabal desperately screamed at his warriors to form up. He then changed his mind and told them to scatter, realizing the situation was hopeless. An orc fell to the ground, lifeless. The arrow pierced his heart, ending his life instantly. The arrow found its mark, silencing the orc chief for good. Panic spread through the ranks as the orcs realized what had happened. They screamed about the loss of their leader. The commander showed no mercy. He coldly ordered his troops to slaughter the remaining orcs. There was no room for prisoners. The orcs broke and ran, fear driving them forward. They desperately tried to escape the archers' arrows. The battle paused for a moment. The human soldiers cheered, their voices echoing across the battlefield. They were celebrating their victory over the orcish horde, relieved that they had survived. The village was safe, at least for now. The sound of hooves echoed through the area. The mounted soldiers rode in tight formation, their armor glinting in the sunlight. From above, the scale of the army was clear. The soldiers moved with purpose, their numbers stretching as far as the eye could see. The villagers stared up in shock, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The soldiers towered over the grateful villagers, their presence a stark reminder of the power that had saved them. The cost of that power was clear in the blood on the ground. The commander's voice boomed across the village. He demanded an interpreter, calling for Tiora to come forward. He needed someone who could speak the local language, and he needed them now. The armored commander announced that they would be leaving right away. The soldier looked up at him, surprised by the sudden order. The soldier pointed, trying to show the general something important. The commander followed his gaze, waiting to see what was so urgent. The villagers asked what would become of them if the orcs left now. They begged the commander to consider their safety, their voices filled with desperation. The villagers dropped to their knees, begging the commander to protect them. They pleaded with him, seeing him as their only hope against the coming darkness. The commander turned to the soldier and asked if he wanted to become a slave. He questioned if there was really any difference between that and living in a kingdom, his voice laced with cynicism. The commander looked down at the villagers, his voice echoing with conviction. He reminded them that they were people who lived to protect their nation, their families, and their people. He emphasized that they didn't take up the sword to protect the strong, only to hand everything over to others. A villager, wounded and dying, begged to be saved. The commander dismissed his pleas, stating that this land was their kingdom alone. He questioned if they didn't understand that they must protect their own kingdom and that they shouldn't have summoned people they couldn't handle. The commander declared that a kingdom protected by the strength of others was bound to fall. He then presented them with a choice: become slaves or take up a sword and risk their lives to protect their families. The commander raised his sword high, the metal glinting in the sunlight. He declared that if they took up the sword, they would become his people and his family. The commander watched the villagers, his expression unreadable. He waited for them to decide, the fate of their village hanging in the balance. The commander declared he would go back. The crowd watched as he turned his horse around, his decision final. A villager stepped forward, shouting that he would take up the sword himself. The commander stood silently, watching the man's sudden display of courage. The woman looked at her son, Euron, and asked him if he would protect his family, even if she died. She was desperate to know if he would carry on if she fell. Euron held the sword tightly, his small hands gripping the hilt. Another villager shouted that he would fight, inspired by the boy's bravery. The commander looked down at Euron, his expression stern. He pointed out that Euron's grip on the sword was sloppy, showing no emotion for the boy's courage. The commander showed Euron the proper way to grip a sword. He told him that now that he held it correctly, he mustn't think about dying. The commander stared intently at Euron, telling him that he must live to protect his family. Euron looked up at him, his expression firm. The air hung heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew what was coming next. The order came from above: retreat. The Goguryeo army turned as one and began their retreat. The soldiers moved with practiced precision, each one trusting the others to cover their escape. The sky above was filled with crows. They flew in every direction, their dark shapes a stark contrast against the bright blue. Crows gathered on a wooden fence, their dark eyes watching everything. They perched close together, a silent, watchful flock. A body lay sprawled on the ground, surrounded by crows. The birds pecked at the flesh, their dark feast painting the ground with blood. A knight on horseback gazed down at the gruesome scene. The crows continued their grim work, undisturbed by his presence. Sir Telemann reported back to his lord. He said that he'd searched the entire area, but there were no slash and burn farmers to be found. The knight surveyed the scene from horseback. The bodies lay still, a testament to the brutal fight that had just ended. The lord asked Sir Telemann for his assessment. Sir Telemann explained that both the orcs and the mercenaries had been killed by the same group. It seemed the slash and burn farmers were responsible, but they had already fled, leaving behind arrows of an unfamiliar design, suggesting a new faction had entered the scene. The lord looked absolutely furious. He cursed the bastards who dared to covet his property. The knights rode through the area, their faces grim. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. The lord declared that once all the slash and burn farmers were gathered to pay tribute to the kingdom, he would eliminate them. His eyes burned with cold fury. A booming voice echoed across the land, declaring that the great lion had arrived. The news spread quickly, carried on the wind. The order to open the gates rang out. The soldiers moved quickly, raising the heavy barriers to allow passage. Villagers watched as a woman approached, commenting on how pale she looked. One of them wondered if the sunlight was different here, making her skin appear so fair. Another villager chimed in, noting that she looked sick. Her frail appearance caused concern among the onlookers. A man leered at the woman, noticing a dark bruise under her eye, but still found her slender and pretty. He then turned to the others, asking if they were drooling over her. The great lion noticed some of the soldiers weren't training as hard as they should. He teased them about slacking off while he was gone. The soldiers nervously denied it. Then he asked about the refugees and what their situation was. The great lion declared that from now on, the refugees would be considered people of Gari. Someone then asked if he was finally going to continue the line of the High Emperor. The Great Lion asked what they were talking about. He explained that accepting them as people meant they needed soldiers to fight off anyone who tried to invade. He also needed women and children who could become the heart of their will to protect. The other man started to say something, but the Great Lion cut him off. He looked down at him and said something. The soldier, standing near HWY, asked the Great Lion to continue the line of the High Emperor, since he had already accepted them as his people. HWY looked on, waiting for the response. The Great Lion stood with one of his advisors, looking out at the new land. The advisor admitted that they had no idea where they were, or even if this was the same world they had once known. The Great Lion knew that giving the soldiers and the people a goal would be a pillar to support their lives. He knew he had to make a decision. The advisor looked at the Great Lion and told him to be the High Emperor, saying he couldn't do it. HWY looked shocked, wondering how he could say such a thing. The Great Lion chuckled, wondering if he should have Buru or Who are you? Do it." The advisor was furious, telling him that this wasn't a situation for such jokes. The great lion turned away, lost in thought. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. HWI, commander of the guard, declared that he had spent his entire life on the battlefield. Because of that, he admitted he wasn't good at running a country. The great lion turned to Commander Demudiok, telling him to handle the affairs of the place as he saw fit. Commander Demudiok started to object, but the great lion cut him off. The great lion explained that he would do what he could do. He told Commander Demudiok that he too had to take charge of the part he was good at. He reminded him that an incompetent emperor or high emperor would ruin the nation. The great lion admitted that the only things he knew how to do were wage war and protect Gauri. He seemed lost in thought. The soldiers started whispering amongst themselves, clearly shocked. They mentioned something about the Titan Uljok and the Titan clan, wondering what in the world that was and what was going on. The soldiers looked at the kneeling dwarves with suspicion. One of them scoffed, saying there was no way they could be related to anyone they knew. He found the idea ridiculous. The soldiers moved closer, studying the dwarves. They pointed out how pale they were, noting that they definitely weren't from around there. They seemed to be trying to figure out where they came from. One of the dwarves looked up, his face etched with worry. The sound of pounding feet grew louder as the dwarves tried to run, but a horde of orcs was closing in fast. The three stone brothers were desperately trying to outrun the orcs. One of them wondered what they should do, fear evident in his eyes. One of the dwarves looked absolutely miserable, tears welling up in his eyes. He cried out that it was all his fault. He cursed his own greed for wanting to find Rosestein, which led them all the way to the Laganza Mountains, only to be chased by orcs. The soldiers fought hard against the orcs, each swing of their swords a dance of death. As one of the soldiers fought, he thought to himself that those people had yellow skin, black hair, and black eyes. The dwarves looked up, their eyes wide with surprise. Were those people humans, they wondered? The dwarves looked at the soldiers, their faces etched with confusion. Something wasn't adding up, and they didn't know what to make of it. The soldiers watched the dwarves carefully, studying their every move. They muttered that they were a little different from the humans they knew, almost like General Baru and General Meanwhile, back at his workshop, Old Man Jang, Gauri's blacksmith, was hard at work. The sounds of hammering and forging filled the air. One of the soldiers watched the dwarves working at their forge, his brow furrowed in thought. They seemed to be blacksmiths, all right, but he couldn't figure out what they were doing all the way out here. One of the dwarves lifted a metal bar, examining it closely. He marveled at the perfect balance and the pure iron, wondering how a human could create such a weapon. Suddenly, a shout rang out, cutting through the air. An orc guard yelled to open the gates, announcing that the great lion had arrived. The blacksmiths stopped what they were doing, their eyes widening. They were clearly shocked by the announcement. Two heavily armored men rode into the area on horseback. One of them grinned, calling out to his brothers. One of the dwarves looked up, his eyes widening. He was amazed by the person's height, bronze skin, and black hair. He realized the legend was true, and that was why all the weapons here were made. The blacksmiths watched the dwarves, confused by their reaction. The dwarves glared down at the blacksmiths and demanded to know what this nonsense was all about. They seemed furious and ready for a fight. The blacksmiths just laughed like maniacs at the dwarves' anger. One of them taunted the dwarves, asking them what all this was about. The general stood alone on the ship, gazing up at the night sky. The stars seemed so distant and unfamiliar, a reminder of how far they were from home. He was deep in thought, trying to figure out what to do next. The general spoke with a calm, steady voice, acknowledging the gravity of their situation. He pointed out that they didn't know where they were, or even if this was the same world they once knew. He urged them to make a decision, knowing that their future depended on it. The great lion stood in the water, his expression serious. He commanded them to carry out everything according to his will, his voice echoing with authority. The great lion remembered his past, lying on the dock. He had been a descendant of the High Emperor, but because he was an illegitimate son, he'd spent half his life on the battlefield. The great lion's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were full of determination. He stared into the distance, lost in thought. The Gauri he sought to protect had gone up in flames. The great lion remembered coming all this way to protect the High Emperor's legitimate line. Unable to even turn his horse back, it turned out the child wasn't a boy, but a girl. Furthermore, the child born within the royal household wasn't even a descendant of the High Emperor. The soldiers waited, their faces grim. The great lion knew he had to make a choice for the soldiers who believed in him. If this was the world he came from, he would build his strength and strike the Dang. If not, then continuing the history of Gauri would be his duty and purpose for those who followed him. The great lion lion stared ahead, his face unreadable. The gravity of the choice weighed heavily on him. He wondered aloud if the die had been cast, not sure if he was ready to face the consequences. The great lion walked down the dock, his footsteps echoing in the night. He approached the gate, his resolve hardening with each step. There was no turning back now. The base sat nestled on the coast, a beacon of hope in this new world. The mountains stood guard in the distance, silent witnesses to the birth of a new nation. The future was uncertain, but the potential was undeniable. The construction site buzzed with activity, the sounds of hammering and sawing filling the air. A watchtower was going up, a sign of the growing settlement and the promise of security. Turns out, the slash and burn farmers and the soldiers had become pretty close. In fact, they'd grown close enough to start falling in love, which was pretty unexpected. It only took about a month for those bonds to form. The food problem? Solved. Thanks to the seeds the slash and burn farmers brought, everyone could eat. As for those dwarves, turns out they weren't just blacksmiths, but skilled architects too. So, the housing problem? Also solved. The dwarves were really impressed by the ironworking techniques. Now, they're working under Old Man Jang, making all sorts of things. It's a real testament to the Titan clan. Two of the men looked excited. They agreed that it was all thanks to General Baru and General Uru. They were ready to work hard. The problem was that they were running low on supplies for the wedding ceremony, which was only a few days away. They didn't have enough liquor, meat, or clothing, and they were also short on bows. Turns out, Veron had a plan. He suggested sneaking into the city and selling the hides and bones from the monsters they'd been hunting. That way, they could make some money. With the money they earned, they could buy the food, clothing, and even weapons they couldn't get here. One of the men volunteered to go, telling the Great Lion that he would go since the commander of the guard was busy. He'd survey the situation and run the errand. The Great Lion listened, his face unreadable. He seemed to be carefully considering the plan and the offer. In the distance, the walled city stood tall, a mix of buildings and fortifications. It was their only hope for getting the supplies they desperately needed. Riding alongside the Great Lion, one of the men asked why he'd insisted on coming. He pointed out that the Great Lion usually ordered him to survey the situation, so it seemed strange that he was here instead. The Great Lion smiled slightly, responding that the other should just honestly admit he was curious about the city. With that, he told them to move out. The group moved along the dusty path, the horses kicking up small clouds of dirt with each step. The wagons rumbled behind them, the wooden wheels making a dull thudding sound. Hidden amongst the trees, a lone figure watched the group pass by. They kept themselves concealed, peering out from behind the thick trunk of a tree. The walled city loomed in the distance, a tall structure of stone and buildings. It was the group's destination, the place where they hoped to find the supplies they needed. As the group approached the gates, armored guards stepped forward, blocking their path. One of them sternly ordered them to move along, his voice leaving no room for argument. Bangul Ray Inca approached the guard, looking at him curiously. The guard acknowledged him with a respectful greeting, saying he had worked hard. Surprised by the guard's kind words, the traveler laughed nervously. He reached out and shook the guard's hand, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected gesture. Bikin Nuga urged the traveler to go inside quickly, his voice laced with a sense of urgency. He seemed eager to get them through the gates and into the city as soon as possible. The cloaked figures moved forward on horseback, accompanied by the armored guard. The rhythmic sound of hooves echoed through the area, a constant reminder of their journey. The armored guard, Mechalin, suddenly raised his hand. He ordered them to stop, his voice firm and commanding. The cloaked figures immediately obeyed, halting their horses. The silence was heavy as they waited, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods. The soldier peered intently at the cloaked figures. He asked if they had black hair and brown skin, his tone laced with suspicion. A pair of hands emerged, holding out a bag. The bag had a strange logo on it, a symbol that seemed oddly out of place. The cloaked figure passed the bag over to the guard, completing the exchange. The guard laughed, clearly pleased with the deal. The guard gave the signal, waving them through. He shouted that they could pass. The group rode forward, passing through the massive gates. They were finally entering the city. Veron suddenly stopped, his face serious. He asked what that man's name was just now, repeating the name, Irun Kalsuman. The cloaked figure's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition in them. Kalsuman, he remembered. The cloaked figure glanced back, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Then he disappeared into the crowded city streets. The group continued riding deeper into the city. People moved out of their way as they passed. Veron examined the goods closely. He realized that it was definitely ogre hide, which meant there had to be ogre blood as well. The man looked at Veron with disbelief. He asked how on earth Veron managed to kill an ogre, saying that even 20 soldiers would struggle to take one down. Veron told him he would tell the story later, but to calculate everything first. first. He then asked if he happened to need ogre blood. The shopkeeper wondered who would buy the ogre blood, since only wizards would want it. He doubted a wizard would even be in such a remote place. Suddenly, a man appeared and said he would buy it. The shopkeeper looked surprised and asked if the man was a wizard. Rigel examined a bottle of the purple liquid. He thought the condition was excellent, and with it, he could finally be free from the cursed second circle. Rigel asked the shopkeeper what he thought of the ogre blood. He offered to take 3 bottles for 1 gold and 50 silver. The shopkeeper looked shocked and said something. He told Rigel that not even 1 gold and 50 silver per bottle was impossible. Rigel held out the ogre blood and the coins. He asked the shopkeeper to wait a moment, offering 1 gold and 50 silver for the purchase. The shopkeeper looked desperate and begged Rigel to accept the money, saying it was all he had. He then insulted Rigel, calling him a scammer and a beggar. Rigel was furious and yelled at the shopkeeper, asking how he dared to insult him. He declared that he was Rigel, the genius wizard said to appear once in 100 years. The shopkeeper looked at Rigel suspiciously. He questioned why a genius wizard would be broke and stuck at the second circle, since third circle wizards were showered with gold. The 3 men stood in silence, the tension hanging heavy in the air. The shopkeeper looked nervous, while Rigel seemed to be trying to control his anger. Rigel began chanting the words of a spell, his voice echoing through the shop. He gripped the bottle tightly as he spoke the ancient words. Oum Sala di Kre Taha, flame born of the desire of fire. Rigel gasped, shocked by the power surging through him. He couldn't believe it. He was actually using magic. Even though he hadn't reached the third circle, he could still feel the magic flowing. Rigel was absolutely furious. He yelled at the shopkeeper, telling him that he had just made a huge mistake. He shouted that the shopkeeper had committed the sin of insulting a wizard. The shopkeeper went flying backwards, crashing into the shelves. He landed on the floor with a thud, clearly hurt. Rigel stood over him, his eyes blazing with anger. One of the men wondered if beggars were practicing magic in this town. Another said that it was more likely a sorcerer had become a beggar. They discussed Rigel's situation, trying to figure out what had just happened. The shopkeeper lay on the floor, his body aching from the force of the blast. He gasped for air, trying to recover from the sudden attack. Rigel turned to the 2 men who had been watching the whole thing. He told them that the sorcery in this place was confusing. He added that he was called a genius, who appeared only once in a century. Rigel went on to explain that others needed 2 years to master mana, but he did it in just half a year. He said that becoming a grand wizard was only a matter of time. Rigel's expression turned sad. He explained that when he stopped at the second circle, his master abandoned him. Rigel looked down at the ground, ashamed. He told them that he became an outcast wherever he went. Rigel was convinced there had to be a way forward. He threw himself into his studies, gaining knowledge that he thought rivaled even the most powerful archmages. Despite all his efforts, Rigel couldn't get past the second circle. He felt like he was banging his head against a wall. Rigel begged his master not to leave him. He was sure that if he could just get his hands on some ogre blood, he could finally reach the second circle. One of the men wondered if they were heading back so soon because of the old guy. He'd heard that the wizard in this land was supposed to be rare and really smart. The other guy asked if he'd kidnapped the wizard, afraid someone else would snatch him up first. The man scoffed, saying that was total nonsense. He'd simply brought him along. One of the men wondered what they were planning to do with Rigel. The other guy shrugged, saying he was rare and valuable, so why not grab him? Rigel woke up with a start, tears in his eyes. One of the men noticed and asked why he was crying. The captor acted all innocent, saying it was natural to cry after being kidnapped. He even complained about the double standard, saying when he does it, it's love, but when others do it, it's a crime. Rigel glared at his captors, thinking they were fools. They must not know that a simple rope couldn't hold a wizard like him. Rigel began to chant, calling on the power of mana to shake its strength with him. He was determined to break free from his bonds. Rigel gathered mana, his eyes glowing with power. He yelled that his energy bolt spell, though only second circle, was not something to be taken lightly. But before the spell could hit its mark, one of the men casually raised a hand. A surge of energy met Rigel's bolt, stopping it dead in its tracks. The system flashed the word block, confirming the man's incredible defense. The air crackled with the remnants of the spell's energy. With Rigel's attack easily deflected, the group continued on their way. They didn't even bother to look back, leaving Rigel stewing in his frustration. Rigel looked absolutely stunned. He stammered, wondering how anyone could stop his spell. The man looked amused, finding the situation quite thrilling. The 3 men continued on their way, the horses trotting along the dirt path. In the back of the wagon, the captured mage sat silently, stewing in his frustration. The man on horseback found the situation thrilling and joked about it. Meanwhile, Rigel was furious and demanded to know how his magic had been nullified. He couldn't believe someone could just stop his spell like that. Rigel Rigel, desperate to understand his captors, used interpretation translation magic. He demanded to know who these guys were and what they wanted. Rigel was amazed that they could speak his language. He pressed them, asking how they could block an energy bolt without a shield. One of the men replied that it was due to item power, telling him to mind his own business. Rigel wondered what item power meant. He was relieved that they could communicate, as he had been worried about leaving the liar behind in the city. Rigel, frustrated and still tied up, demanded to know how they had turned his energy bolt into nothing. He pressed them to reveal the formula they had used, desperate for answers. One of the captors smirked at Rigel. He called him old man and said that it was rude to ask about another's secret arts so carelessly, clearly unwilling to share any information. Rigel was taken aback by the response. He seemed to suddenly understand something, his eyes widening slightly. Down the path, a group of figures approached at a steady pace. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the trees. The captor glanced at the approaching group with a serious expression. He decided that they should deal with these uninvited guests first, his hand moving towards his sword. The captor looked at the approaching group. He figured it would be foolish to lose a considerable income over a single moment of greed. He was weighing his options. He glanced back at the cart. The items loaded on it were quite numerous, even things that looked expensive. He was getting greedy. Just in time, those two moved first, he thought. If he killed these guys and took the items, he could keep the source of income and take the goods. He was ready to attack. Unlucky bastards, you are. The captor unleashed a sudden blast of magic. The approaching group didn't even have time to react before they were engulfed in flames. The smoke cleared, revealing a figure standing unharmed. A familiar face, Kalsuman. The captor was stunned. The captors didn't hesitate. They unleashed their magic, sending flames roaring toward the approaching group. The defenders were caught in the blaze, but the smoke cleared to reveal one of the defenders completely unharmed. He retaliated with his own magic, sending a wave of fire back at the captors. The flames didn't seem to bother him at all. He walked right through the fire, his eyes fixed on the captors. With a burst of speed, the attacker closed the distance. He struck one of the captors with a swift, deadly blow. He shouted something. The remaining captor watched in horror as his ally fell. He screamed, hoping someone would come to their aid. The captor, now desperate, screamed at the other men. He demanded to know if they were going to just stand there or actually do something. Meanwhile, the defender held up a card, channeling his power. The card glowed as he prepared to cast Extinguish Fire. The flames erupted, engulfing the men who had been ordered to attack. One of them screamed as the fire burned him. The defender stood in the aftermath, completely untouched by the flames. He held the card steady, a look of determination on his face. The fire still raged around him, but the defender stood tall. The attackers were down, defeated and burning. The swordsman loomed over the tied-up man. The man on the ground looked up and said something. The swordsman raised his blade high, ready to strike. The world seemed to turn red as the final moment approached. The man screamed, his voice filled with terror. The swordsman's blade was about to fall. The swordsman stood over his fallen foe, sword in hand. The other man watched, a look of doubt on his face as he said something. The man pleaded with the swordsman to stop. He said something. The swordsman stared down at the tied-up man, his eyes filled with cold determination. He took a breath and said something. The tied-up man looked back, sweat dripping down his face, clearly terrified. The swordsman focused his energy and called out. Blue energy surged from his hand. The tied-up man screamed in terror, his face contorted in pain. The swordsman looked down at the card in his hand, a frustrated expression on his face. He sighed. The swordsman glanced at the flames nearby, then back at the tied-up man. He wondered aloud, sounding annoyed. The swordsman looked down at the tied-up man, a strange expression on his face. He checked the man's pulse. He said something, his voice flat. The swordsman watched the tied-up mage, thinking about how he cast magic with just a trigger word and no chanting. He was impressed by the mage's skill. The old man looked down from his perch, thinking about their direction. He realized they were heading towards the Laganza mountain range, where the dragon lived. The old man turned to the tied-up mage, his eyes widening. The old man thought that the mage must be a dragon. The old man's hands trembled as he thought about becoming an attendant of a dragon, the origin of magic. He knew that if he could surpass the second circle. The tied-up mage looked up at the old man and smiled. He apologized for the kidnapping, his voice calm. Rigel, still tied up, pleaded with the swordsman. He insisted that even if they didn't like him, they must have brought him here because they needed him. Rigel promised to do anything they commanded. The swordsman looked down at Rigel, thinking about what he had just said. He wondered if the mage could really be of use to them. Suddenly, the old man's eyes widened in shock. He seemed to have realized something important. The old man was stunned by the sight of the village. He commented on how well organized it was, especially given its location in the Laganza mountains. He added that the discipline discipline and morale of the soldiers rivaled even the empire's. A man on horseback greeted someone as Grand Master. Then, he noticed the old man behind him. He asked who the old man was, before shouting out in disbelief, calling him Titan. The men wondered why they kept being called Titans. The white-haired man added that even dwarves, thought to have vanished after the divine demonic war 1,000 years ago, were here. Kalsuman scoffed at Rigel, correcting him that he was a mage, not a sorcerer. He reminded Varan that he hadn't forgotten the crime of trying to harm him. Varan stammered, saying it was because Kalsuman had insulted him. Kalsuman ordered Baru and Uru to take Varan to the execution ground. They acknowledged the order. Kalsuman then asked where they had found him. One of the men replied that they had found him on the way.